My name is Ethan Miles, and I've been a waiter at La Vienne, one of the fanciest restaurants in downtown Chicago, for almost 7 years now. It's the kind of place where a single dinner bill can pay my rent for 2 months. Every day we serve people in suits worth more than my car. The city's elite, investors, politicians, celebrities. Working there taught me one thing: people's attitudes change depending on what you wear, not who you are. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that morning. The day I met a man named James Carter and realized how deeply wrong I'd been about people. It was the middle of January. Chicago winters are brutal. The wind cuts through you, and the cold feels like it sinks straight into your bones. I came in early that morning, 8 o'clock a.m., before opening to prep tables, polish silverware, and restock coffee cups. The sky outside was gray, and the sidewalks were dusted with white snow. By 10:30, we were open for brunch service. The restaurant was quiet, just a few regulars and a couple celebrating an anniversary. Soft jazz played from the speakers, candles flickered on every table. I was standing by the counter, refilling sugar jars when the door opened and everything stopped. A man stepped inside. He looked out of place completely. His coat was torn at the sleeve, his shoes muddy and worn down. His hair was messy, and his beard looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. He carried a small, old backpack. For a second, I thought maybe he'd come to ask for directions or to get out of the cold. The host looked at me, waiting for my cue. I walked over and tried to be polite but firm. "Sir, may I help you?" He smiled faintly. His voice was calm, soft-spoken. "Yes," he said. "I'd like a table, please." That caught me off guard. I hesitated, glancing around. People were already staring. "Sir," I said carefully, "this is a fine dining restaurant. Maybe there's a diner nearby." He interrupted me gently. "I understand, but I have an appointment here." An appointment? I almost laughed, but I didn't. I looked back at the host's stand, then at the man again. He didn't look aggressive or confused. He looked patient. Like he'd been through worse. I sighed. "All right, sir, follow me." I led him to a small corner table, partly because it was empty, but mostly because it was out of sight from most guests. He sat down quietly and placed his old backpack beside him. As I handed him the menu, I caught a glimpse of his hands, scarred, weathered, but clean. He didn't touch the menu, just sat there, staring out the window at the snow falling. A couple at the nearby table whispered. The woman said, loud enough for me to hear, "Why would they let him in here? He's making the place look bad." I felt embarrassed, not for him, but for myself. Because I agreed with her deep down, I didn't see him as a customer. Just as someone who didn't belong. When I came back to take his order, he looked up and smiled politely. "Just coffee, please, black." "Are you sure that's all, sir?" I asked. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm waiting for someone." I nodded and walked away. As I poured his coffee, the chef poked his head out from the kitchen and asked, "Who's the guy in the corner? He looks rough." I shrugged. "Probably just trying to stay warm." The chef smirked. "You better make sure he pays before he leaves." Everyone laughed. I did too, and I hated that I did. A few minutes later, the manager, Sophia, walked in. She was in her early 30s, sharp, confident, the kind of manager who could spot a wrinkled napkin from across the room. She saw the man immediately, her brows furrowed. "Who's that?" I explained quickly. "He came in, said he has an appointment. I figured I'd let him sit until he realizes." Before I could finish, she froze. Her eyes widened. "Wait," she said, her voice low. "Is that James Carter?" I frowned. "Who?" She grabbed her phone and scrolled fast. Then she turned the screen toward me, a photo of a man in a tuxedo smiling beside a woman at a charity event. Same face, same eyes. The caption read, "James Carter, CEO of Carter Holdings, steps down following wife's tragic death." I blinked. "That can't be him." Sophia didn't answer. She walked straight toward his table. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked up slowly, his expression calm, warm, even. "Sophia," he said with a faint smile, "you still run this place beautifully." Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God, it is you." The room went silent. Every customer who had been whispering now stared in disbelief. Sophia gestured for me to bring coffee. I rushed to the kitchen, my heart pounding. When I returned, she was sitting beside him, listening quietly. He said, "After my wife died, I realized I'd spent my whole life chasing things that didn't matter. Money, success, image, but not peace. So I walked away." Sophia looked heartbroken. "Sir, people thought you were dead. You vanished." He nodded slowly. I needed to remember who I was without all the noise." He took a sip of coffee and smiled at me. "You make good coffee, son." I swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir, and I'm sorry about earlier." He looked at me for a moment and said quietly, "Don't be. You reacted the way most people would. That's why I come to places like this, to remind myself how the world really sees us. His words stung, because I knew they were true. About 20 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up outside. Two men in suits rushed in, scanning the room until they found him. "Sir, we've been searching everywhere," one said breathlessly. "The board's been waiting," he smiled gently. "I told them I'd be gone for a while. I wasn't sure they'd understand." They handed him a sleek leather briefcase, and that's when he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something that made my breath catch. A platinum card, shiny, embossed, engraved with his name, James Carter, Executive Chairman, Carter Holdings. He placed it gently on the table next to the coffee cup. I stared at it, realizing how wrong I had been. This man, the one I'd nearly turned away, had more wealth and power than anyone in that room combined. But his face wasn't proud. It was peaceful. He paid for his coffee a few dollars and left $100 tip. When I hesitated, he said softly, "It's not for the service, it's for the lesson." Before leaving, he turned to Sophia and said, "Take care of your people. Don't let them forget to see hearts instead of faces." Then he looked at me. "You'll make a good man one day, Ethan. Just don't let judgment get there first." He walked out into the snow, hands in his torn pockets, smiling. The black car followed him slowly, its lights disappearing into the white haze outside. That night after closing, I sat alone by the window and watched the snow fall. I thought about how quick I was to label him, how society teaches us to value appearance over humanity. The next day, Sophia printed a quote on a sheet of paper and pinned it behind the counter. It read, "The richest souls wear the poorest clothes." James Carter now, every time someone walks into La Vienne, whether they wear a Rolex or rags, I remind myself. You never know the story behind the face. Because sometimes the man you laugh at could be the one who owns the world, and the greatest wealth isn't in money, it's in humility. Moral of the story, don't judge people by their appearance. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. True worth comes from compassion, not status.